You said you had two children that were also on the spectrum. They were both recovered. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey on getting to that point?
It's been a long one, but you know what? And a lot of people tell me, oh, well, sure, that's easy for you to say. You got a recovered kid. But I can honestly say that if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't change anything about my kids at all. They've made me a better person. They've made me more patient. They have taught me so many skills and so many life lessons and given me so much appreciation for things that I would have never in a million years even thought about without them. My daughter, who is 13 now, was diagnosed at 7 with bipolar disorder and was suicidal in that 7 to 10-year-old range, which was horrible. It's incredibly difficult to go through that with a young girl, well, with any kid, but very hard. And so we went, and of course I didn't know anything at the time. I had been diagnosed with bipolar at 16 and ADHD later in life. And so my daughter and I both went through the med route, you know, on a med, off a med, on a med, off a med. And we try something, and you know, with her, some of the things that we did made her psychotic, you know, hearing voices and hallucinating, and a lot of the things that they did for me would make me better for a short period of time, and then they stopped working, or they'd make me much worse. But we never really found anything that leveled me out and made me functional, nor did we find anything that leveled out my daughter and made her functional. And when she was 6 years old, here's my little guy, Chad, gets born, and he was perfect. He developed beautifully. He was the cutest thing on the face of the earth. And at about 10 months, he got really sick. And we had 9-month vaccinations, a whole bunch of them at one time. And you know, did mercury play a role? I don't know. I personally don't think that mercury is the only thing involved that's causing the autism epidemic. I think it plays an enormous role, but I think there's so many other things going on environmentally and immunologically, and I mean, there's so many components, it's impossible to say, but he definitely had a whole bunch of vaccinations, and he did not have any type of an immediate response, but within the next week or so, he just wasn't himself. He did run a fever, and he was kind of puny, you know, and he got a cold, and it turned into an ear infection, and that turned into meningitis, and we ended up in the hospital on IV antibiotics for, I don't know, 4 or 5 days, and he was never the same. And when we came out for the next almost, I'd have to go back and look at charts, but I think it was probably 4 to 6 weeks, we had chronic diarrhea. I mean, to the point that, you know, numerous times a day, up the back, running down the legs, all over the floor, you know, and the type that, you know, the yeasty stuff, the type that just knocks you over with the smell. And I kept going back saying, there's really something wrong. I mean, he'd just lay there like a limp rag doll and he just wasn't, you know, his body was there. It was the shell of my little guy, and he wasn't there. And he never got better. I mean, the gut stuff cleared up a little bit, and the pediatrician kept telling me, oh, he's fine, you know, no problem. You know, he's not getting better because you're not feeding him. If you don't feed him solid food, he will continue to have diarrhea for the next 2 years. Until you feed him solid food, he's not going to get over his diarrhea. It's like, okay, I kind of see your point to that, but here's the deal. How do you get solid food down a child who refuses to eat? What are you going to do? Shove it down their throats? You know, there has to be something that you can do to move beyond that. And it just went on and on and on. And he did end up getting past the real sickness phase and the diarrhea phase, but he never came back. And I never really noticed it, because from the time he got really sick until the time we started saying there's really something wrong, I just thought, you know, he's still not himself. He's just being puny. He hadn't kicked back in fully. He's going to be fine. And we started doing 12-month developmental screenings at the pediatrician, and they're saying, you know, how many words does he have? And I went, well, gosh, now that I think about it, he doesn't have any. And he used to have a whole bunch. And is he following directions? No, he's not doing that either. As a matter of fact, you know what? I think he's deaf. And I was thinking, we had chronic ear infections, chronic ear infections, antibiotics out the wazoo, until we got his tubes put in it too, and it stopped there. But the damage was done by that point. So we eventually changed pediatricians about 23 million times, and I finally ended up with one who had 2 children who had autism. And I knew, and I had not heard the autism word at this point, and I kept saying, I think something's wrong. I think he's deaf. And she said, well, let's get some screenings done. And she said, I don't think he's deaf. I think he has a processing problem with language. And I thought, oh, processing problem. Okay, that's fixable, right? And she said, I think it's a mild form of autism. And the first time you hear that word, to me, it's kind of like being told you have cancer. Anything else that they say after that, you don't even hear because you're still stuck on the A, And so I don't think I heard anything else she said that day. And about a week later, a friend of mine had a really good friend who had a son with autism who was recovered. And I went to lunch with her, and she hooked me into biomed and ARI and Karen Sorosi, and got me started on my journey. And I'll tell you what, I am indebted to that mom. Absolutely 100. Susan Bailey, I love you. I'm indebted to that mom, because to this day I'll tell you that if she had not pushed me on that track and introduced me to that information, I don't think I would have ever found it, because I don't know anybody doing what we're doing. And where we live, at least, And once you get in that track and you start running in those circles, well, then you find tons of people. But when you're a mom and you're not in that circle yet, how do you find these people? Where do you go? You can't look it up in the phone book. Autism 101. It's really frustrating. And if you don't know where to go and there's nobody to tell you where to go, you're stuck, and you feel like you're alone on this horrible journey. And what if I do the wrong thing? What if I make the wrong choice? What if I do this and that's really not what he needed, and I don't find out until later, and oh my God, now the window's closed. And it's so incredibly frustrating. And I made the decision very early on that I wasn't going to leave that decision in somebody else's hands. That's my responsibility as a parent, to do what I need to do for my child. And I was not seeing the medical and the educational community stepping up to the plate and offering good alternatives. And you hear things like, well, give them lots of speech therapy, and let's put them in special ed, and golly gee, let's hope for the best. But he may not ever talk. And a lot of these kids end up getting institutionalized, and you're going, does anybody ever say the word recovery? Does anybody ever say the word that, there's a lot of things you can do now. There's a possibility that these guys could be, not promising, can't make those promises, but there's a lot that can be done to provide opportunities for these kids to get better. And yet, I didn't hear one of them, not one. Not one. We got speech therapy and we got OT. And both of those things were wonderful in and of themselves, but if we were dealing with people that didn't understand autism, what were we doing?